Hello again, and welcome to Just Say No. I'm your host, Maria Calabrese, and you're listening to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM. It's time to grow our know with some of the smartest minds in the industry.
By 2020, Bank of America and Merrill Lynch estimate that will grow to $35 billion. And many experts believe it could eventually reach $200 billion each and every year.
Taking me a while to get it. Had to live and cry to appreciate life, and what you give is worth it. When you're holding me, when you hold me so close, someone further in under your skin. Wanna leave a mark so that
Today, we're taking on a topic that's got a lot of people talking and maybe even a bit nervous. Cannabis and psychedelics. Imagine if something as simple as an herb or a mushroom could reshape our understanding of mental health. Well, if you're feeling unsure, you're not alone. And today's guest is here to clear up some of the myths and bring us closer to the science behind these powerful substances that are not only for the adventurous, but hold a real true promise for improving brain health and enhancing general well-being. I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Manesh Gurn. Manesh is a neuroscientist who's earned his PhD from McGill University. Dr. Manesh's research focuses on understanding the effects of cannabis, but even in more depth, psychedelics like psilocybin on the brain and how they can support our mental health. Manesh brings a wealth of knowledge from his groundbreaking work at UCSF in Robin Carhart Harris's lab, leading the exploration on how psychedelics impact brain connectivity and neuroplasticity. His expertise bridges psychology, philosophy, and neuroscience, which enables him to offer a really broad view on how these natural substances might help us understand our minds in new ways, and we can apply this knowledge to our daily lives to improve them. And if you'd like to learn more at home, Dr. Gurn also shares his research as the psychedelic scientist on YouTube, where he breaks down the latest findings in an easy to digest way. Whether you're a bit curious or cautiously skeptical, we've got an incredible guest and an exciting discussion lined up. So sit back, relax, and let's get smarter together on Just Say No. Welcome, Dr. Gurn. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like you briefly to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Robin Carhart Harris's lab and your role in the research being done.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Maria, and I'm really excited to chat with you today. These really are some really important and popular topics, and people are increasingly being asked about psychedelics and cannabis, and the stigma is starting to be reduced, but there's still a lot of work to do, a lot of stuff to clear up. Yes, as you mentioned, I work at UCSF currently as a neuroscientist, and what we primarily do is brain imaging research on psychedelics such as psilocybin, where psilocybin is the molecule in so-called magic mushrooms that has profound effects. And so what we study is how that works on the brain and how that might relate to changes in things like well-being and psychological functioning. So what many people might not know is that psilocybin is used very commonly to treat depression in research studies with a lot of promise. And it's also, in a variety of ways we'll get into, actually good for your brain and healthy in certain ways and helping it grow and regenerate and be more flexible over time.
Just let's really start at Psychedelics 101, cannabis, magic mushrooms. Let's start with magic mushrooms. So, how would a magic mushroom, for instance, as a fungi, differ from one I put in my salad?
Yeah, so the fungi kingdom is a massive one, and there's a huge variety of different types of fungi. And in particular, there's around 200 types of fungi that contain psilocybin. And so there's a huge variety. And so the main difference is that they contain this little molecule and a couple of other molecules. Other than that, you might have walked past some psilocybin containing mushrooms on a hike or in a forest, as they do grow in a variety of places naturally across the world. And they're actually quite common. And just by the naked eye, it would be indistinguishable from any other mushroom growing. It just happens to be the case that if you consume these, they have a profound effect on your experience.
And psilocybin is just one of many compounds, correct?
Yeah, so there's several, but psilocybin is the main one that elicits the psychedelic effects, as we'd say.
And I think that's very interesting in parallel when it comes to cannabis because many people think, and it's nobody's fault, it's because of the prohibition. There's been a huge amount of misinformation or no information. So, what most people heard of was CBD or THC. And most people think it's just THC and high. Now, CBD is having its day, but there's over 150 compounds in cannabis too. So, and all of these have the potential for medicinal benefit. So, your research is so critical. So, cannabis, not a mushroom. Cannabis, I'm told, is a vegetable and an herb. Can you verify that and tell us a little bit about cannabis compared to fungi?
Certainly. I mean, we can call cannabis a plant, a herb, and it's a different class than fungi. Obviously, it's not a mushroom, but similar in that it's a naturally occurring organism and it's also similar to magic mushrooms actually in the fact that it's been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years in different cultures across the world. And it's quite interesting that we are very idiosyncratic in the modern world as defining these compounds as drugs to be outlawed. Because cannabis, as well as magic mushrooms, have been revered as almost as sacraments, as inducing these spiritual and healing experiences that should be used in a ritual kind of way. And so, they've been kind of revered as these parts of the natural world as a gift to us that we can use for our own benefit. And so it's really interesting. We have this view of them as these dangerous drugs in the modern context.
Dr. Gurin, what exactly is neuroplasticity?
It's a fascinating topic that's actually becoming more and more of interest in the mental health fields as well as neuroscience. So, neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to change itself, to rewire connections, and to change itself in response to experience, in response to injuries. It allows us to learn. It's involved in a variety of processes. And the old dogma, maybe 20 years ago was that once we're an adult, our brains don't change. They're not plastic anymore. We're set in our ways. That's just how we are. And now we know from decades of research that it's not true.
So if my husband tells me stop trying to teach an old dog new tricks, no, don't let him get off on that.
Yeah, I would not let people get away with that. I think that's just an excuse that people like to use, but I think the research has told us time and time again that the brain has this remarkable ability to change, and that might be less when we're older, but it's not zero. It's still there. And if you believe it's there, you can create the change. If you believe it's impossible, you're going to create that for yourself.
Wow. Wow. And it might be a little bit more challenging when you're older, but is that where these substances can help facilitate it?
Yes, exactly. I think particularly magic mushrooms have been highlighted for being potent neuroplasticity enhancers. And that's one of the reasons why they're finding in these studies with depression that people will take psilocybin mushrooms or just pure psilocybin in a therapeutic setting with a therapist 1 to 3 times, let's say over a month or so. And 6 months later, a month later, they're cured of a depression that they had for 20 plus years, which is insane. But it's only possible because of these neuroplastic changes in the brain, which are relatively unprecedented in the context of psychiatry.
Now, I know people who have suffered in chronic depression and going back, you talked 20 years, but going back even further, I know people have been on psychopharmacologic medicines before the SSRIs, right? There was a problem with Valium, and then that became addictive. And then there was, I think, Elavil. Those were dating back. And then the SSRIs came out, but people are on those forever. And can you talk a little bit about the side effects associated with, I mean, a lot of people who need to be on medication shy away from it because, right? Because of the side effects. And then there's left to suffer. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Certainly. I mean, there's definitely a place for these standard pharmaceuticals. Standard antidepressants help many people cope and live lives that they wouldn't be able to live otherwise. But as you said, they come with side effects, they come with a trade-off. And so, one of the most commonly prescribed class of drugs are SSRIs, so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, things like Laxapro or Prozac. People may have heard of either of those two commonly prescribed drugs. And those are both antidepressants, and they basically change your brain chemistry to help you feel a bit better. But it comes at the cost of lessening your capacity for positive emotions as well. They kind of dull you emotionally. They can lead to weight gain. They kill people's sex drive, and can lead to fatigue and all sorts of things. And so the trade-off is you're less depressed, but you're less anything else, right? It's a dulling out. And you're expected to take it every single day indefinitely, otherwise you're going to get worse again.
Can you tell us what a drink does to your brain? It's not calming your nerves, right? It's killing, it's dulling. It's killing the brain cells. I'm making the analogy to the antidepressants where it's a dulling effect. And when I talk to people who do psilocybin or consume cannabis, they say it actually relieves the anxiety and the depression to help them engage, not become the stoner stereotypical couch lock. Could you speak a little bit? Is there truth to that? Are there studies? Is that your experience?
I think that's a really good point to make. The important distinguishing characteristic of alcohol versus cannabis and magic mushrooms is that alcohol is toxic for your brain. Cannabis is not. Magic mushrooms are not. So alcohol is very literally neurotoxic in a way that these other substances are not. And it's interesting that alcohol is culturally sanctioned while these are demonized, but that's a whole other topic. But what you're alluding to was how alcohol will dull and suppress our emotions, and as opposed to giving us an opportunity to actually face them and work through them. And how alcohol works in the brain is it primarily activates particular brain receptors, which are the brain receptors that reduce the activity of our brain cells. And so literally when you drink a lot of alcohol, it's suppressing the activity of different brain cells. And this is also why people feel a bit more loose and disinhibited. Our usual kind of self-consciousness and our ability to regulate ourselves and our impulses is reduced because literally those brain cells are being turned down. And same with our areas related to emotions, like sadness or fear. Those are also tamped down, which perhaps can be useful to socialize and talk to that attractive person you're nervous to talk to. But over time, you're really not making real growth and progress as an individual. You're using it as this kind of crutch or way to avoid your feelings.
And then that's where the addictive effect comes in. You need it and you rely on it, whereas you're not having the corrective emotional experience. The difference if you're consuming certain cannabinoids and terpenes or magic mushrooms, your brain is actually changing, and then you experience that. How would that go if I were to enter into therapy and I had some type of post-traumatic stress and I had to face a fear that I've just been dampening down, go away with alcohol and pharmacological drugs? What would that therapy look like?
Yeah, it's really important to emphasize that when we're talking about magic mushrooms and psychedelics in the context of mental health, it's in a very structured way. It's not the same as just taking it with your friends and going to a party or a festival or what have you. It's a very structured process where how it begins is you'll meet your therapist that's guiding you through it, and they're a trained professional who knows specifically about psychedelic experiences and how to guide people through them. And if you've passed the screening, we usually screen people out with a family or personal history of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, for example. There's just a bit more risk there. So we screen those people out, we bring them in, we ask them to share about their lives, what they're going through, what they're looking to get out of the experience, and tell them how to best navigate the experience in a safe way. And then the actual drug session is done in a very controlled way where you're in this comfortable room, you're asked to wear eye shades and listen to music on a playlist, and you literally just go internal into your experience and explore what comes up. And naturally, memories will come up that you've long forgotten. You might start sobbing a little bit from emotions from years ago that you forgot that you didn't process. And you're guided through this very vulnerable and raw experience of reliving memories, processing emotions, having new perspectives on your life. And then after that powerful experience, you're supported in, okay, how do we make sense of this? How can we ground that into your life and the changes you want to make? And so that's the process that magic mushrooms are usually given in to treat depression or anxiety or these other conditions.
And what actually happens to your brain vis-a-vis the neuroplasticity? What's actually happening?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So during like experientially, psychologically, you're going through all these insights and reliving and so on and processing emotions. But at the same time as that's happening, our brain is becoming more plastic. So literally, it's allowing your brain cells to grow new connections that then you can encode what you're experiencing in a lasting way.
Wow, these are neural pathways.
Your neurons are physically growing. They're physically grow extensions temporarily, but then you can make them last.
The belief used to be, right, the brain couldn't change or heal. When did in research time was this discovery made?
Yeah, I think broadly over the past 20 years, it's slowly being growing in recognition that it's possible. But I think with psychedelics in the last 10 years, it's shown like, wow, we can really boost this in a reliable way, in a way that's potent and that lasts and that can be used for therapy. That's relatively recent. In the past decade, that's really taken off.
The realization that the brain has a remarkable ability to actually adapt. You got to get past that trauma, so you have to be able to tolerate it, adapt, and then heal. I mean, wow. And isn't it a little paradoxical? Like the brain doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily wired over time to adapt. It's more it likes structure. It likes certainty, not so much uncertainty. So that's how our pathways become cemented or habitual patterns happen.
Yes, I love that you brought this up because the brain really is in the business of trying to make our lives as automated and as easy as possible, right? So it's gets stuck in these patterns which it thinks, oh, it makes living easier because it makes you certain I'm gonna enter into this environment, I'm gonna be needed to act in this way, and this is what works, this is who I am, this is how the world is. But what's interesting, and there's a lot more research emerging these days suggesting that the more rigid we are in our ways, the worse our mental health, the worse our resilience, right? The worse our adaptability. And so I think the cornerstone of mental health and emotional resilience is flexibility. Flexibility in our thoughts, in who we think we are, in what we believe about the world, and always being open to changing and growing. I think that's one of the biggest markers of mental health and flourishing overall.
How do we have innovation? How do we get past traumas? How do we even just have conversations if we're on two different sides of a I mean to be able to have a conversation with you, there's many people I know who will not even listen to me. They're going to just say no. And no. Oh, Maria, cannabis, psychedelic. What are you, crazy? LSD, people jumping out of, well, okay. Well, maybe you could use some little flexibility and expand your brain. There's a time and place for structure, but But is that why they'll say for older people it's very important to get comfortable with the uncomfortable? Learn a new language, pick up an instrument. Is that where that comes in for older people?
Certainly. And those things you just mentioned help boost neuroplasticity. So to keep your brain plastic and nimble, some of the most important things you can do are seek out new experiences, learn new skills, learn a language, learn an instrument. It's never too late. Also, one of the biggest boosters of neuroplasticity is endurance exercise, whether that's swimming, cycling, jogging, even brisk walks. Doing that for half an hour, let's say 3 to 4 times a week, is really, it would make wonders for people's brain health and mental health.
In terms of cannabis, can you tell us a little bit? I've heard like the mother of all cannabinoids now is being coined CBG. And I know that the prohibition limits research, but it's exciting with more acceptance and with more legalization. You could speak to whether the barriers of research are coming down. And if you could tell me a little bit about the research on CBG or how certain cannabinoids affect the brain.
Certainly. And so cannabis, as you were saying earlier, has a whole variety of different compounds within it. It's not just THC, which is what we usually associate it with because that's what gives the typical high we associate with cannabis.
And not to interrupt you, maybe you could just explain the difference as well. THC, before it is heated up, it's actually in its raw form THCA. Is that correct?
Right, it is correct. Yeah, TCA when warmed up, when heated, turns into THC. Yes.
Which has so even only THC has the psychotropic effect.
Yeah, certainly. And the three cannabinoids, as they're called, cannabinoids are just cannabis molecules that occur in the cannabis plant. The most popular ones that are studied and looked at for their benefits and effects are THC, which we just mentioned, CBD, and then CBG, which you also briefly mentioned. And so I can just walk through each of these really briefly. So THC is the compound, that makes people high. It makes people stoned. That's what people associate with cannabis. And this has the typical effects. And in addition to that, it can also it's often, obviously, and many people know this, used to relieve anxiety. In lower doses, particularly, it can really calm people's anxiety and also help with things like chronic pain. And that's THC. But then also CBD is also potently reduces anxiety and has been found in studies to do that. Studies have also found that it could be antidepressant. And not only that, it's also anti-inflammatory. So people, even with arthritis and different inflammatory conditions, are experiencing relief from CBD. Not to mention also its effects for reducing epileptic seizures. So reducing seizures for people with epilepsy. And it's actually FDA approved for that. It is a compound CBD-based drug that does that. So CBD has no psychological effects acutely, like it doesn't make you high, but behind the scenes of our biology through our endocannabinoid system, which I could talk about, is actually has all these different health benefits. And then the last one is CBG, which is a kind of simpler molecule than CBD or THC, and actually is, can be considered a precursor of them. It's can turn into them with different steps. And that's also very much involved in reducing inflammation. It modulates our immune system, and it also relieves oxidative stress, meaning it's an antioxidant, which again, it means it clears up cellular damage. It's healthy for our cells as well throughout our bodies.
Now, cannabis has a rougher road. I think you can answer this in terms of research.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, there's a lot more research on magic mushrooms than cannabis these days.
There are actual peer-reviewed studies for cannabis on those indications. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly. These are the most rigorous randomized controlled trials done at esteemed institutions with cannabis and for psychedelics for that matter.
Great. And on our show page, we'll list references for our listeners. Yes, for anti-seizures, Epidiolex. CBD is used in Epidiolex, pharmaceutical drug, which that'll be a whole other episode, has caused quite confusion because once the FDA approved it as an ingredient in a prescription drug, they didn't speak to it as an ingredient in food or in supplements, which is holding things up when it comes to food and supplements. Do you believe, even though CBD is an ingredient in a pharmaceutical drug such as Epidiolex for seizures, do you believe there is an OTC and over-the-counter use for, I mean, yes, right? It should be available in tinctures, gummies, topicals.
100%. I think they're trying to monopolize by making it into a psychiatric drug that they can profit off of and patent. And it's an IP play. It's really just a psychiatry pharmaceutical play. That's what that is. I think CBD should be widely available in a variety of different forms. It's non-psychoactive. It's not addictive. It's not harmful outright for the brain or body. If anything, is really beneficial for it when used in the reasonable doses. And so there's no reason why it should be outlawed the way it should be. This doesn't make any scientific sense.
Follow the money. I mean, we go all the way back to the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act before they probably even knew there was an endocannabinoid system, and back when Eli Lilly was actually growing marijuana, and before we turned to poppy. But that's a whole other episode we'll get on talk about opioids. But and even the U.S. government held the patent on CBD from around, right? Just recently expired. And the indication was as a neuroprotectant. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of conversation for us to spark. But, so many people justifiably are concerned about potential risks of cannabis and on psychedelics, and they talk about maybe you could just speak to, are they addictive?
Right. So we could start there. Yeah. We could start with magic mushrooms really quick. The answer is no. There's no evidence that they create physical dependence or psychological dependence in 99% of cases. And just the nature of the way the drug works is you can't really take it twice in a week in a high dose because you get tolerance really fast. And also the effects are so intense and somewhat unpredictable. You don't know if you're going to have this, blissful, euphoric experience of laughing versus processing sadness you didn't process when you were 7 years old, right? You don't know which direction it's going to go necessarily. And so it's hard to get addicted to that because you're not chasing a high. It doesn't give you a high. It gives you a profoundly variable experience. So that's why magic mushrooms are really unique. For cannabis, there's some potential for it to be habit forming and addictive, but much less than nicotine, less than alcohol. And so, which is to say, like, we normalize alcohol and nicotine a lot, and we demonize cannabis when it's less toxic, less harmful, and less addictive. But although I would say, like, there is some potential for addictiveness with cannabis, as people often will use it to self-medicate anxiety and pain. And anything that you're using to self-medicate some kind of suffering can be addictive. Whether that's food, it could be exercise, it could be reading, it could be learning, it could be anything could be addictive.
Workaholic, TikTok, social media. I get couch locked by Netflix. I'm not worried about cannabis. One thing but you're right, because it's anything that's treating. I'm a chronic back pain sufferer, having had 4 massive spinal surgeries, and anything that anything that treats just they're not getting to the root. It's just treating the symptom. It's going to become addictive, whether it's physically addictive or actually addictive in your brain. It's going to become addictive because you're taking care of the symptom, and when the pain comes back, that's unpleasant. So you want more, and you want more, and you want more. But the ability to change the actual physiology of your brain and work through a trauma, adapt and heal, and learn learned to become adaptable. That's, I mean, wow. I mean, the impact on the world. Cannabis is smoked. Is smoking for mushrooms a form of consumption or not typically?
No, so mushrooms usually you would just eat them, or people will make a tea out of them. That's also quite popular, or just bake them into chocolate or baked goods. So, but you consume it orally, as we say, like through your mouth, through your digestive system, and obviously cannabis can be consumed that way as well. And I think for cannabis, yes, like smoking and combusting plant material can can irritate your lungs, of course. And so, but there's a whole variety of ways outside of that, whether it's vaporizing it, which is probably the better way to consume the herb, as well as edibles or tinctures or lozenges that go under your tongue. There's a variety of ways of consuming cannabis without smoking it.
Is there emerging research on combining psilocybin and cannabis or psychedelic mushrooms and cannabis? Do they have opposite effects or can they be complementary?
Right. It's an interesting question. And, the scientist in me has to say we don't know yet. Those studies haven't been conducted. Obviously, a lot of people out in the world do combine them in different ways. And it's not like taking a stimulant and smoking cannabis, where it's kind of conflicting a little bit. I think cannabis can potentially complement psychedelics if used in the right way at the right point in the experience to help ground people, get them back in their body, relieve any anxiety, and so on. But at the same time, smoking too much, especially high THC strains, while under a psychedelic, could potentially lead to more anxiety, and potentially even paranoia. And so there are risks, and it's kind of a sensitive thing to combine these two, or really to combine any drugs that are psychoactive is always a bit of a risk and something to be handled sensitively. But I think if we zoom forward 10 years from now or 20 years and where this is being studied, I think there will be a use case for cannabis helping regulate people's anxiety, and help them move through potentially difficult emotions during a psychedelic experience.
I hope we can have that emerging research. What are the most promising findings in the work and research you're doing in the lab? And can you tell us a little bit about the lab and about Robin?
For sure. So, as you've mentioned, I work at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, and my supervisor is Dr. Robin Carhart Harris. And he's a major pioneer in the space, published over like hundreds of papers, and he did the first ever modern study using psilocybin mushrooms for depression, and also the first ever brain imaging studies of psilocybin, LSD, and DMT, two other psychedelics. And so he's a world recognized leader in the space. And I actually moved to San Francisco to work with him directly. I've known him for years. And we're doing a variety of studies at the cutting edge of how psilocybin affects the brain. And in particular, one of our studies now we're looking at, we're trying to see how different people's brains respond in different ways. And how that we might use that to predict whether they're going to get better or what the long-term effects for them is going to be. For example, we want to say by measuring your brain now and seeing how it reacts to psilocybin during the experience, we know we know whether in 6 months or a year from now you're going to be doing better or the same or potentially even worse. And we're trying to create these models to do that based on the brain.
Very, very, very exciting. And if someone wanted to explore the possibility of working with a neuroscientist or a psychiatrist, are there many trained in this type of using magic mushrooms in their psychiatric practices in the United States?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this to start there, I think it's important to recognize the legal status of mushrooms, right? Because they are federally illegal. They're Schedule One. However, there are places where there are a growing number of cities where it's decriminalized. And so, yeah, so you can access it. You could be gifted it and possess it and use it without being criminalized, without it being illegal. Um, and so that is possible. And there are certain states leading the charge, actually. So Oregon has state-approved psilocybin service centers where you can do legal psilocybin therapy. You could literally drive into Oregon, fly in there, whatever, and do legal psilocybin therapy today. People are doing it. And Colorado is also they've approved a bill for it as well. And so they're in the middle of that. And I've actually interfaced with a lot of practitioners and organizations doing trainings for practitioners. And I've supported them in Colorado to help bring that in. So there are places in the States to do that, and also places like Jamaica, for example. Psilocybin mushrooms were never illegal in Jamaica, and there's tons of retreat centers. People fly out to do psilocybin in Jamaica as well, for example. Um, so to answer your first question, whether there are people trained in this, there are thousands and thousands of people trained in it in the States. A lot of them do it kind of, underground, and some of them do it in these legal sanctioned places where it's either decriminalized or legal in the States.
Yeah, I don't know. I think our brains as a society have to be expanded because in mental health, if you look at the history, we're drilling holes in people's heads and trying to do a lobotomy, and that was okay. Legal. Are they still? They're still doing electroshock therapy in the United States. Is that correct?
Yeah, they do it as a last resort. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny. There was as a side story in Canada. So I'm Canadian. I'm originally from Canada. And so in Canada, we have a way through the government to give compassionate access to psilocybin therapy, actually. But in order to qualify for it, you need to have a depression that didn't respond to at least 2 or 3 antidepressant medications. And in most cases, they ask you to try electroconvulsive therapy first, which is absurd. It's like to be able to be suitable to try this natural occurring mushroom in a therapeutic setting, you have to be shocked first, and that has to not work in order to get there. It's just absurd. It's quite ridiculous.
What and I don't look. Some people only have certain therapies available to them, or maybe even benefit. But what does electroshock therapy do to the brain? Can you just explain that?
You know what is really interesting, actually? It through stressing the brain and overstimulating it, it actually boosts neuroplasticity. It's kind of wild. So there is reasons why it seems to work, not beyond just something barbaric. And so interestingly enough, by zapping it, you're stimulating activity and it gets your brain to release all sorts of things to combat that. So it could potentially be anti-inflammatory as the brain responds to it, but it also upregulates neuroplasticity. It shocks neurons into activating a lot and increasing their plasticity. So there is some sense to it.
All right, but um, I used to go to chiropractors who would do a very aggressive crack, but if there's a gentler modality, I try to seek out the ones that kind of work the muscles and then the spine will just kind of go back into, gentler modalities, less invasive. My goodness. Yeah, but okay.
And ECT is not necessarily helping people work through their trauma. It's not working through their emotions. You're just being zapped artificially into feeling better.
I've heard it could help break habitual patterns, and one of those could be on smoking or improving your diet, drinking less alcohol for pain management. You mentioned, but do you have any kind of real life examples or stories, or have you yourself experienced a positive benefit?
Certainly. So, we can start there, I suppose. Like me, many years ago, as a teenager, actually, which we can get into the whole adolescence thing. But I think one of what it had done for me is it allowed me to view myself and my life in a new way. So at the time I was, younger, I was suffering from a bit of bullying. I was didn't really know myself too well, and my self-esteem wasn't the highest. And psilocybin mushrooms allow me to kind of see beyond that limited perspective I was having, see my strengths and see my life in a new light, It actually inspired me to become a neuroscientist. It inspired me to pursue a path of knowledge and learning, actually. I know that doesn't happen to everybody necessarily as a teenager doing these things, but it really inspired the deep curiosity and a connection to a love for learning. And so it made that impact for me.
For you, it was a gateway to a doctoral, postdoctoral, leading edge research, pioneering, and maybe having this fantastic disruptive effect on, in a good way, on helping improve people's lives. I appreciate your sharing that with me. That to me is better than any case study. I mean, you know, anecdotal evidence. We have a lot of it. What do you, as a scientist, how do you place value on anecdotal evidence? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of value in considering these case studies. I mentioned myself, but I've heard countless people who overcame addictions or alcoholism or their depression or seen that in loved ones and so on. And while these, of course, don't qualify as scientific evidence per se, but they tell us that there's something there. It's not all, there's something to be uncovered and understood. And so for me, these case studies provide hypotheses and ideas that then can be studied in more controlled studies. And that's exactly what we do.
You can't deny it. Seeing is believing, and you and I come to it. We're drawn to these natural substances when Western medicine just didn't have a good solution. And I mean, thank God you found it as an adolescent and got what you needed. But how wonderful if it could be normalized and just the standard treatment that doctors weren't fearful to discuss. Does mindfulness that affect your neuroplasticity?
It's a good question. Very likely. I'm not sure if those studies necessarily have been conducted because I can get into all the scientific details on why. It's a bit hard to study. But I think mindfulness really does dovetail well with both cannabis and psychedelics. And it does certainly change your brain over time and allow you to regulate your anxiety and your emotions in a better way and just to be a more grounded individual. I'm a daily meditation and mindfulness practitioner, and I have been since I was like 19 years old. So I've always prioritized the daily practice, and it's definitely been transformative for me.
You're a young man, but an old soul. And don't go anywhere, everybody, unless you're driving, because when we come back, we're going to debunk outdated myths and stereotypes in our Nip It in the Bud segment after this quick word from our sponsor.
Some say age is a state of mind until you get those nagging pains in places you didn't even know existed. 50 is the new 420. GreenBeeLife.com, your leading cannabis media brand. Changing the way the world sees green.
Hey, welcome back. You're listening to Just Say No. I'm your host, Maria Calabrese. I'm discussing natural ways to unlock our brain's potential with psychedelic neuroscientist Dr. Manesh Gurn on KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM. So now we're gonna nip it in the bud. We're gonna break some stigmas and look forward. So cannabis myths versus reality, psychedelic myths versus reality. So many myths surrounding cannabis and psychedelic use. What are some of the common misconceptions you've encountered? And can you debunk them with what the research says?
Certainly. So let's start with cannabis. So one of the most common ones, and we were talking about this before the show started as well, is the idea of cannabis as a gateway drug. Now, I heard this growing up. A lot of people did. It's just part of basically drug war propaganda, essentially, is what it is. And there's no evidence in the epidemiological studies, the large-scale survey studies, that that's the case. The things that get cannabis to lead to other drug use are related to your social environment, socioeconomic status, all these different factors, social factors and cultural factors. It's there's no evidence that cannabis use alone leads people to try other drugs. Often it's a gateway to your fridge or a gateway to, buying a bunch of snacks from your local 7-Eleven or something. There's no evidence that people smoke cannabis and then automatically go on to, try heroin or cocaine or anything. Those are radically different compounds. And I think that's just a myth that should really just not exist anymore, but people seem to still believe it. But there's no evidence for it.
A big part of that is because they're both classified legally as Schedule 1.
Yeah, which is absurd. And this is really funny, Maria, because you mentioned earlier the US had a patent on the medicinal use of cannabinoids going back decades, while at the same time the FDA was saying, and DEA, it's Schedule 1, it's no potential for medical use and high abuse potential, when they had a patent showing that it's not that. It's absurd.
As a neuroprotectant, and they weren't allowing the NFL and the football players. My God.
Yeah, who could have really benefit that from concussion recovery? And that's a topic we didn't talk about, but CBD can be really helpful for recovery from a brain injury or a stroke for that matter. There's studies on this. So it's quite terrible it's like anti-scientific, very politically and racially motivated. We didn't get into the drug war, but there's all sorts of nonsense around that.
Follow the money. But guys, I think the first step, you don't have to go out and try magic mushrooms or go into therapy or even try cannabis, but just try to, I applaud everyone who's listening, because you're converting NO to KNOW. And hopefully this knowledge will be useful, because honestly, until people say enough is enough and complain, right? All politics is local. You got to start on the local level. The constituents, if they start demanding some better health care, only then will the politicians listen. And it's all politically motivated, and it's just bad medicine, and it's frustrating. And it's nobody's fault to have the perceptions you have. But this conversation and just listening to it is an opportunity to let's all go for a jog afterwards and expand our brains. So, yeah, dangerous toxic substance or powerful natural medicine. Sounds like it's a powerful natural medicine, and it's a gateway to greater understanding, greater empathy, greater adaptability. The planet's just getting more and more people on it. If we can't adapt and exercise some flexibility.
So another one is that, and this is a nuanced one, but the idea that cannabis damages your brain. So I've looked personally at a lot of research literature on how brain imaging has shown differences in the brain as a result of cannabis use. And this is actually something that me and a friend of mine, he's a Stanford MD, we're going to publish this in a paper, actually, hopefully in the next 6 months or so. We reviewed every study ever done on whether cannabis use changes the structure of our brain. And what we found is that a lot of studies found increased size in certain brain regions. A lot of studies found decreased size in a lot of brain regions. When we bring them all together, they cancel each other out. So what that means is it's a mess of research, that there's no conclusions that can be drawn on actual structural changes that last in your brain as a result of cannabis use. And in terms of like what that means for brain damage, it means there's no reliable effect. And if we could say anything, it's that heavy chronic use in adolescence likely does cause potentially damage or developmental changes in the way, impairments in the way the brain might develop in certain ways, and that's a risk factor. I would certainly not advocate for a heavy chronic use in teenagers or early adults for that matter. It's all about moderation. And the research does suggest that using it at reasonable dosages, not every day, but in a moderate way, has minimal to no harmful effects. There's no evidence that damages the brain per se. And in fact, as we've been saying, depending on the strain, especially if it's a high CBD ratio strain, it can be even good for the brain. It can even be anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, which are the two things that basically mean neuroprotectant and protecting the health of your neurons. And so it's a nuanced topic. I think the idea that, oh, you're going to smoke cannabis, it's going to damage your brain, is not true. It can only potentially be true in extreme circumstances for young people, teenagers smoking a lot. But it's a lot more nuanced than that, and the research is very messy.
And even, God forbid, if you're younger and you're struck with a terrible, terrible disease, or like it's being, a God forbid cancer, you have a pediatric case and you start using Rick Simpson oil or high THC. Again, if it's, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the studies show of the effect if someone has a medical reason to take high strains. But even then, like, it would probably be microdosed and a tolerance would be built and it would be monitored. So it would come down to responsible use, I would think.
Yeah, I think everything in moderation, right? And something I want to add here, actually important, is that if you look at the effects of alcohol in the brain, the amount of brain damage that alcohol creates, whether you're an adult or an adolescent, is far, far greater than cannabis. Because alcohol is directly neurotoxic. Cannabis isn't. Cannabis over time will create changes in your brain and, in a more subtle way. Whereas alcohol, which every 19-year-old or whatever, 19, 21-year-old, they're binge drinking out there, they're partying with their friends, they're doing all these things, which is terrible. And that with that, like the amount of lifelong brain damage that happens to like 90% of youth who drink like that is massive. And it's like it's so culturally sanctioned. Yet we're demonizing cannabis use, which, in order to, even if you smoke chronic heavy cannabis as a 19-year-old, it's not going to be as harmful as chronic binge drinking for your brain. And people don't realize this because, again, there's all sorts of misinformation and stigma around cannabis.
So Willie Nelson's 91 years old, and I could say I don't know how many decades he's been smoking cannabis, but many decades. And thank God it wasn't alcohol. I don't know if he'd be here for his 91st birthday, let alone still doing concerts.
Because alcohol also speeds up dementia and Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. Alcohol does that in a way cannabis doesn't. Cannabis can even protect against that. CBD is used to help with people with Alzheimer's. You're not going to prescribe somebody vodka for recovering from Alzheimer's, or rum or whiskey or what have you. That's just going to exacerbate it. And so these are important distinctions. There's so much cultural arbitrarity around it. And just, yeah. Do you want to know something promising, Maria? Actually, there's statistics amongst like Gen Zers and the younger generation. They're drinking less and less alcohol. And in fact, people are, even going to parties and taking small doses of magic mushrooms, for example, like microdoses, as they're called, which is a tiny amount, which it's not really a potent experience, but it can uplift your mood. It might slightly change your experience and like mildly intoxicating, but definitely not like alcohol and not harmful for the brain like alcohol. So I think amongst the young people who were born, let's say late 90s, even 2000s, they're drinking much less than any generations previously, and so there's a downward trend there. So they're growing up. So and we like culturally we're growing up in certain cases, and there's a lot of maturity around these things and awareness that people who might have grown up and were an adult in the 80s with all the nonsense that was peddled back then. Just, it's hard because that's what you were taught growing up, and so it's hard to question it, and there's resistance and fear. But I think we need to be open to the facts and what's real and what the science is telling us. Otherwise, we're closing ourselves off from a potentially extremely beneficial, holistic resource for our health, right? Which is cannabis and magic mushrooms to some extent.
And we're suffering as a society. We're in pain. We're just not enjoying life when we could be. Just numbed out, getting medicated or drinking, and then having the side effects associated with that. There's a whole world out there to discover and learn. But, and it's always balancing, right? I think the hardest thing in parenting is setting healthy limits and, not repressing the child, but you want to protect them and to be able to let go and let them explore and experiment. Bad things can happen. So anthropologically, we do for safety or try to just say, no, don't go there, or but I hope people will, before jumping to NO, try to know KNOW. Just become curious about things. My husband's always telling me, I don't know why. I mean, I have to take a magic mushroom. Maybe I'll do that and we'll do another episode and I'll tell you why. But no matter what that guy says, knee jerk, I say no. No. I don't know why. It's a defensiveness, it's a control thing, right? But it's in there. And he gave me a good exercise. He said, could you try just saying, instead of jumping right to no whenever I say something, how about, yeah, maybe, and then think about it? And it's not easy for me to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you're sharing this, and it's like a real experience in a lot of cases. For me, I think a really important skill to cultivate is a skepticism of your knee-jerk reactions and emotional responses, right? It's like, oh, I feel this right now. I feel very aversive. This feels wrong. It feels bad. Why do I feel that way? What if I just sat with it? What if I just breathed? Like, what if I question that a little bit?
As we wrap up today's episode of Just Say No, I hope we've managed to shed some light on the potential of cannabis and psychedelics, psilocybin as viable natural medicines when used responsible. Dr. Gurn has guided us through the science behind these substances, highlighting their unique role in mental and brain health, particularly through harnessing neuroplasticity. Our brains have a remarkable ability to adapt and heal, to adapt and heal. So, I mean, who can be against that? A gateway to being more adaptable and to healing. Hey, sign me up. While these topics, though, honestly, they can feel intimidating or even controversial, emerging research is revealing promising benefits for those seeking natural alternatives to conventional treatments or when conventional treatments just don't have an answer. We've learned that destigmatizing these medicines, it's going to require ongoing education and informed dialogue like today's episode. By understanding how these substances interact with our bodies and minds, we can move beyond the fears toward a more open, compassionate perspective on their potential, which is documented. So let's keep the conversation going. I encourage everyone to visit our website, greenbeelife.com, where you can find educational programming on GBL TV, and in our Green Bee Life Learning Center, there's articles, guides. Stay curious, continue educating yourselves, and approach these topics with, as my husband likes to tell me to how to approach him, not with a no. Yeah, maybe. Let's approach them with an open mind and respect for the science. Before we sign off, I'd also like to offer you 2 super valuable resources to further your understanding of applying the knowledge we've learned from today's episode. Visit Dr. Gurn's website at maneshgurn.com. That's Manesh, MANESHGIRN, maneshgurn.com, to download a free guide, 5 Steps to Rewiring Your Brain with Psychedelics. This PDF offers practical insights into harnessing the power of neuroplasticity. And for those listeners or healthcare providers wanting to take a deeper dive, check out Dr. Gurn's masterclass and ebook, also at maneshgurn.com/masterclass. It's an excellent opportunity to learn from a leading pioneering expert in this most critical field. Thank you for joining us on Just Say No today. Remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your health and well-being. Stay curious, stay informed, and always keep learning. Until next time, This is Maria Calabrese encouraging you to just say no with a K-N-O-W.
Let me tell you this, let me tell you right.
Just Say No is a Green Bee Life presentation airing live weekly on Friday afternoons from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific on KCA Radio and KCAA TV. Archived audio episodes are on Green Bee Life, greenbeelife.com, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and most third-party major platforms. For archived videos, check them out on GBL TV, on Green Bee Life, YouTube, and Rumble. To follow us, our Instagram and Facebook is at Just Say No Radio. To apply to be a guest on the show or for sponsorship and advertising opportunities, go to greenbeelife.com/Just Say No. And feel free to reach out to me, Maria, for any questions at maria@greenbeelife.com or call me at 818-758-6925.
Appreciate life and what you give is worth it when you're